The October rain had been falling on London for 3 consecutive days when the inventor, Mr. Jonathan Whitmore, arrived at Baker Street, carrying an umbrella that had not closed since the moment he first opened it 6 weeks earlier, his hands trembling with exhaustion from the constant burden of holding the eternally extended canopy, bringing with him a mystery that would prove to be one of the most mechanically impossible cases Sherlock Holmes ever investigated. Holmes, who had been examining various locking mechanisms and spring designs as part of his studies in criminal methods involving trapped objects, work that would prove remarkably relevant to our investigation, looked up with immediate fascination as our visitor entered, struggling to maneuver the persistently open umbrella through our doorway, despite the clear autumn weather outside. Mr. Whitmore was perhaps 35 years old, an engineer and inventor of modest reputation, with the intelligent eyes of a problem solver, now clouded by frustration and genuine fear. And the umbrella he carried was an elegant black silk model with carved wooden handle that remained stubbornly spread despite obvious attempts to close it. Before I continue with this most peculiar case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring these mysteries to life. Like this video, hit the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let us proceed with the baffling mystery of the umbrella that never closed. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, he began, his voice thick with desperation. I know this seems absurd, a man seeking help with an umbrella that won't close, but this is no ordinary mechanical failure. This umbrella has been open continuously for 6 weeks, 42 days to be precise, despite every effort to collapse it. I've tried force, I've dismantled the mechanism, I've consulted engineers and mechanics. Nothing works. The umbrella remains open, immovably so, as if held by some force beyond mechanical explanation. And the longer it remains open, the stranger things become. Objects near the umbrella begin malfunctioning. Clocks stop, locks jam, springs break. My workshop has become unusable, filled with broken machinery that fails for no discernible reason. My wife has left me, terrified by what she calls the cursed umbrella. My colleagues avoid me. I'm exhausted from carrying this burden constantly, unable to set it down without risking damage, unable to close it despite every attempt. I need you to solve this mystery before it destroys what remains of my life and sanity. Holmes approached the umbrella with intense scientific interest, examining it from every angle. May I? He asked, reaching for the handle. Mr. Whitmore surrendered it gratefully, and I watched as Holmes attempted to close the umbrella through the standard mechanism, pressing the sliding ring toward the handle. The umbrella did not budge. He tried, applying considerable force. Still nothing. He examined the metal ribs, the spring mechanism, the locking catch. Everything appeared mechanically sound, yet the umbrella remained stubbornly open. Remarkable, Holmes murmured. The mechanism shows no obvious damage or obstruction. The spring appears functional, the ribs are properly aligned, the fabric is intact. Yet it will not close. Mr. Whitmore, tell me the exact circumstances of when you first opened this umbrella. Leave no detail out, regardless of how insignificant it may seem. Mr. Whitmore settled into a chair, looking relieved to finally tell his story completely. It was September 1st, a rainy morning. I was leaving my workshop to attend a demonstration at the Royal Society. I had been invited to present some of my recent inventions. As I stepped outside, the rain was falling heavily, so I opened this umbrella, which I had purchased new the previous day from a shop in the Strand. The moment I opened it, I noticed something odd. The action felt unusually smooth, almost effortless. The umbrella seemed to spring open with more force than normal, but I thought nothing of it at the time and proceeded to the Royal Society under its protection. "And when did you first attempt to close it?" Holmes asked. "When I arrived at the Royal Society, perhaps 20 minutes later, I tried to close the umbrella in the usual manner, but it wouldn't budge. I assumed the mechanism had jammed from the rain, so I set it aside to dry, planning to address the problem later. After my presentation, I returned to collect it and tried again to close it. Still nothing. I examined it more carefully then and realized the mechanism appeared perfectly functional. No visible damage, no obvious obstruction. Yet it simply would not close. Did anything unusual occur during your walk from your workshop to the Royal Society?" I asked. "Any encounters? Any incidents? Anything out of the ordinary?" Mr. Whitmore considered carefully. "Now that you mention it, yes. As I walked along the Strand, a street urchin, a young boy perhaps 10 years old, ran directly into me, nearly knocking me over. He apologized profusely, seemed very distressed, and ran off before I could say anything. At the time, I dismissed it as accidental collision with a careless child. But thinking back, there was something deliberate about it. The boy seemed to be aiming for the umbrella specifically, and after the collision, I noticed he was staring at the umbrella with odd intensity before running away." Holmes's eyes gleamed with understanding. "The collision was no accident. The boy was likely working for someone who wanted to attach something to your umbrella. Mr. Whitmore, may I examine the umbrella's handle and ferrule, the pointed end, more closely?" Using his magnifying lens and various tools from his chemistry bench, Holmes conducted an intensive examination of every component of the umbrella. After nearly an hour of meticulous investigation, he made a small exclamation of discovery. "Here," he said, pointing to a tiny modification at the junction where the ribs connected to the central shaft. "Someone has installed an additional component, a small mechanical device no larger than a button, cleverly disguised to blend with the umbrella's existing mechanism. This device is what's preventing the umbrella from closing." "But why?" Mr. Whitmore asked, bewildered. "Why would anyone want to prevent my umbrella from closing? What possible purpose could that serve?" "That," Holmes said grimly, "is the question we must answer. But first, let me attempt to remove this device." He worked carefully with fine tools, trying to extract the mysterious component without damaging the umbrella's mechanism. After several minutes of delicate manipulation, he stepped back with a troubled expression. "The device is designed to resist removal. Any attempt to force it triggers additional locking mechanisms that further entrench it in the umbrella's structure. We need to understand what this device is and why it was installed before we can safely remove it." Holmes spent the following hours conducting chemical and mechanical analysis of the device, using every instrument at his disposal. What he discovered was both fascinating and alarming. The small component was an intricate clockwork mechanism powered by a wound spring. But not an ordinary spring. This spring was made from an experimental metal alloy that stored far more energy than conventional spring materials, allowing it to maintain tension for months or even years without winding. This is sophisticated engineering, Holmes explained. The device uses the spring tension to maintain constant outward pressure on the umbrella ribs, preventing them from closing. But there's more. The device also generates a weak electromagnetic field that interferes with nearby mechanical objects. This explains the malfunctions you described in your workshop. Clocks stop because their delicate mechanisms are disrupted by the field. Locks jam because the tumblers are affected. Springs break because they're subjected to irregular forces. This umbrella has essentially become a portable source of mechanical chaos, affecting everything in its vicinity. But who would create such a device? I asked. And why use it to sabotage Mr. Whitmore's umbrella specifically? Holmes turned to our client with an intense gaze. Mr. Whitmore, you mentioned you were traveling to the Royal Society to present inventions. What were you presenting? Were they valuable? Were they controversial? Did they threaten anyone's interests? Mr. Whitmore's expression shifted to understanding, mixed with horror. I was presenting a new type of lock mechanism, one that's virtually impossible to pick using conventional methods. I designed it specifically to address the epidemic of burglaries in London. Several banks and wealthy estates had expressed interest in purchasing the design. But there was another inventor, a man named Malcolm Graves, who had been working on a similar concept. He attended my presentation and was furious afterward, claiming I had stolen his ideas. I hadn't. My design was completely original, but Graves was convinced I had somehow accessed his workshop and copied his work. And if your workshop became unusable due to mysterious mechanical failures, Holmes said, you would be unable to continue developing and producing your lock design. Your reputation would suffer as you failed to meet deadlines and delivery promises. Meanwhile, Graves could proceed with his competing design unimpeded. The umbrella that never closes is not merely a curiosity. It's an industrial sabotage weapon designed to destroy your productivity and credibility. The investigation into Malcolm Graves revealed a man consumed by professional jealousy and resentment. Graves had indeed been working on advanced lock mechanisms, but his designs were inferior to Whitmore's. When Whitmore presented his superior design to the Royal Society, Graves saw his potential fortune disappearing. Rather than accept competitive defeat, he decided to sabotage his rival through unconventional means. Graves has connections to the criminal underworld, Holmes discovered through his network of informants. He's known to associate with professional burglars and safecrackers, men who would be very interested in preventing better locks from being developed and deployed. Graves likely received both financial backing and technical assistance from criminals who wanted to stop Whitmore's lock design from reaching the market. The street urchin who had collided with Mr. Whitmore was tracked down by Holmes's Baker Street irregulars. The boy admitted he had been paid by a man matching Graves's description to attach something small to a specific gentleman's umbrella on the Strand. The boy didn't understand what the device was or why it was being installed, only that he was paid well for what seemed like a simple prank. The device was prepared in advance, Holmes explained. Graves knew Whitmore's route to the Royal Society, knew he would be carrying an umbrella on that rainy morning, and arranged for the device to be covertly attached. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Sabotage Whitmore through a seemingly inexplicable mechanical problem that would baffle conventional investigation. An umbrella that won't close seems absurd beneath serious investigation, yet it achieves the real goal of disrupting Whitmore's work through the electromagnetic interference it generates. But removing the device proved extraordinarily difficult. Holmes's initial attempts to dismantle it triggered additional locking mechanisms, making the umbrella even more resistant to closure. After days of careful study, Holmes concluded that the device included a timer mechanism. It was designed to remain active for precisely 3 months before automatically releasing and allowing the umbrella to close normally. Graves planned this as temporary sabotage, Holmes explained. 3 months of disruption would be enough to cause Whitmore to miss critical deadlines, damage his reputation, and allow Graves to capture the market for advanced locks. But it wouldn't be permanent enough to raise serious investigation. An umbrella that won't close for a few weeks might seem like odd mechanical failure. An umbrella that remained open forever would eventually attract the kind of scrutiny that could expose the sabotage. 3 months was calculated to maximize damage while minimizing discovery risk. "But I came to you after 6 weeks," Mr. Whitmore said. "So the device should automatically release in another 6 weeks?" "Theoretically, yes," Holmes replied. "But I'm unwilling to leave you suffering for 6 more weeks when we can intervene. I've developed a method to safely disable the device using carefully applied electromagnetic counterpulses that will neutralize the mechanism without triggering the additional locks. It's delicate work, but I believe I can free your umbrella within the next few hours." Holmes set up an elaborate apparatus in our sitting room involving electrical coils, precisely calibrated magnets, and various instruments for measuring electromagnetic fields. He positioned the umbrella in the center of this equipment and began applying carefully controlled electromagnetic pulses. I watched as the umbrella seemed to quiver slightly with each pulse, the ribs trembling as the hidden device fought against the interference. After 3 hours of patient work, applying pulses of varying frequency and intensity, Holmes achieved success. There was a soft clicking sound from within the umbrella's mechanism, and suddenly it collapsed smoothly into its closed position. Mr. Whitmore, who had been watching with intense anxiety, let out a cry of relief and joy. "It's closed. After 6 weeks of torture, it's finally closed." He opened and closed the umbrella several times, marveling at the smooth, normal operation of the mechanism. Holmes carefully extracted the sabotage device, now disabled, and examined it with satisfaction. Excellent craftsmanship, I must admit. Graves may be ethically deficient, but his mechanical skills are impressive. This device represents sophisticated engineering in service of industrial espionage. It will serve as evidence for his prosecution. The legal case against Malcolm Graves was complex. The sabotage was unconventional, the damage indirect, and proving criminal intent required demonstrating the connection between Graves, the street urchin, and the device itself. Holmes's evidence was meticulous. Testimony from the urchin identifying Graves, metallurgical analysis linking the device's exotic alloy to materials Graves had access to, records showing Graves's connections to criminals who would benefit from preventing advanced locks, and most convincingly, the device itself as physical proof of sophisticated sabotage. Graves was arrested and charged with industrial sabotage, conspiracy, and destruction of property. During interrogation, he initially maintained innocence, but when confronted with the overwhelming evidence Holmes had assembled, he eventually confessed. Whitmore's lock design would have made mine obsolete, Graves admitted bitterly. I spent years developing my system, invested everything I had, and then he appears with something better, simpler, more elegant. It wasn't fair, so I decided to level the playing field by ensuring he couldn't capitalize on his advantage. The umbrella device was meant to disrupt his workshop subtly, making him appear unreliable to potential clients while I secured contracts. It wasn't meant to be permanent, just enough disruption to give me time to establish market position. You didn't consider the human cost, Holmes said coldly. Mr. Whitmore carried that umbrella for 6 weeks, unable to close it, exhausted from the constant burden. Watching his business collapse, his marriage destroyed, his reputation ruined. The electromagnetic interference affected not just his workshop, but his entire life. All because you couldn't accept legitimate, competitive defeat. Graves received a prison sentence of 5 years for industrial sabotage and conspiracy. His reputation in the engineering community was destroyed, and his own lock designs, whatever merit they might have had, were tainted by association with his criminal actions. He emerged from prison a broken man, unable to find work in his field, and died in obscurity several years later. For Mr. Whitmore, the resolution brought practical relief, but lasting damage. His workshop functionality was restored once the electromagnetic source was removed, and he was able to resume work on his lock designs. But the 6-week disruption had cost him crucial contracts and damaged relationships with potential clients. Some of the opportunities he had lost never returned. I'm grateful to Mr. Holmes for solving the mystery and stopping the sabotage, Whitmore said months later. But I can't recover the 6 weeks that were stolen. Can't undo the damage to my reputation. Can't restore my marriage. My wife left during the worst of the crisis, unable to cope with the bizarre situation and my obsession with the umbrella. Even though the truth is now known, she hasn't returned. The umbrella is fixed, but my life remains broken. This outcome troubled Holmes, as it represented another case where solving the mystery and achieving justice didn't fully restore what had been lost. We caught the saboteur and ended the attack, he reflected, but we couldn't prevent the damage that occurred before we were engaged. 6 weeks of continuous sabotage left scars that legal judgment can't heal. The umbrella itself became something of a curiosity in Holmes's collection of criminal apparatus. He kept it, along with the extracted sabotage device, as examples of unconventional industrial espionage methods. The umbrella functioned perfectly normally after the device was removed, but Whitmore refused to take it back. I carried that umbrella for 6 weeks of hell, he explained. I can't look at it without remembering the exhaustion, the frustration, the helplessness. Even though it's mechanically fine now, psychologically it's still the cursed object that destroyed my life. I'd rather never see it again. Holmes's investigation of the sabotage device revealed further disturbing details. The exotic metal alloy used in the spring was experimental material that only a few manufacturers produced, and all of them had been approached by agents, representing criminal interests seeking materials for unspecified security applications. The electromagnetic interference effect was intentional rather than accidental. The device was designed specifically to disrupt nearby mechanical systems. This wasn't Graves's invention alone, Holmes concluded. The device shows sophistication beyond what a single engineer could achieve. Graves had assistance from organized criminals who wanted to develop new methods of sabotage and disruption. The umbrella device was a field test. If successful on Whitmore, similar devices could be used against other targets. We've uncovered not just individual sabotage, but a broader program of developing unconventional weapons for industrial espionage. This realization led to broader investigation by Scotland Yard and the Home Office. Other inventors and engineers were contacted and interviewed about unusual mechanical failures or mysterious malfunctions in their workshops. Several reported problems consistent with electromagnetic interference, suggesting they too had been targeted by similar devices that had either expired naturally after the 3-month timer or had been removed by perpetrators after achieving their sabotage goals. Whitmore may have been one of many victims, Holmes reported after coordinating with authorities. His case came to our attention because he sought help, but others may have simply suffered mysterious malfunctions, blamed bad luck or poor maintenance, and never realized they were being deliberately sabotaged. The umbrella that never closed was unusual enough to trigger investigation. More subtle deployments of similar technology could go completely undetected. The case influenced subsequent security practices in industrial and commercial settings. Workshops began conducting regular electromagnetic surveys to detect interference devices. Engineers were educated about industrial espionage methods and encouraged to report unusual mechanical failures that might indicate sabotage. The exotic metal alloys used in the sabotage device were placed under export controls to prevent their acquisition by criminal elements. Years later, the case remained one of Holmes's favorites for demonstrating how apparently absurd problems could mask sophisticated criminal schemes. "An umbrella that won't close sounds ridiculous," he would say when telling the story. "It seems beneath serious investigation, more appropriate for comedy than criminal inquiry." Yet that absurdity was precisely why it was effective. Who would suspect industrial sabotage through a malfunctioning umbrella? The ridiculousness provided camouflage for sophisticated attack. The case also demonstrated the increasing sophistication of industrial espionage and the lengths competitors would go to gain market advantage. We typically think of industrial sabotage as arson, theft of plans, or bribery of employees, Holmes wrote in a monograph about economic crimes. But the umbrella case reveals more creative approaches, using electromagnetic interference to disrupt productivity, deploying devices so unusual that they seem like mechanical accidents rather than deliberate attacks, timing sabotage to maximize business damage while minimizing detection risk. Industrial security must expand beyond traditional concerns to address these unconventional threats. Mr. Whitmore eventually rebuilt his business and successfully marketed his lock designs, though never achieving the dominant market position he might have captured if not for the 6-week disruption. He remarried years later, not to his first wife who never returned, but to a woman who knew his story and accepted him despite the bizarre episode that had nearly destroyed him. "I learned that life can be derailed by the most absurd circumstances," he told me years after the case. "An umbrella that won't close. It sounds like something from a fairy tale or comedy play. not like something that could destroy a career and marriage. But that absurdity was precisely what made it so devastating. If I'd been attacked in obvious ways, factory fire, stolen plans, vandalized equipment, people would have understood and sympathized. But an umbrella problem, people thought I was mad, obsessed with trivial mechanical failure, or my business collapsed around me. The truth was too strange to be believed until Mr. Holmes proved it. That's perhaps the cruelest aspect. Suffering from a real attack, but being dismissed as irrational because the attack method was so unconventional. This psychological dimension of the case, the victim being dismissed as irrational precisely because the attack was so bizarre, became a recognized phenomenon in subsequent cases of unconventional sabotage. Holmes coined the term absurdity camouflage to describe how criminal methods that seemed ridiculous could actually be more effective than conventional approaches, because they prevented victims from being taken seriously when seeking help. The more absurd the attack method, the more isolated the victim becomes, Holmes explained. Whitmore carried an umbrella that wouldn't close for 6 weeks, suffering real consequences, but was dismissed as eccentric or delusional by those who couldn't imagine such a problem being deliberately inflicted. Only when he came to me, someone who investigates impossible things routinely, did he find someone who took the problem seriously and investigated the underlying cause. How many other victims of absurd-seeming attacks are currently suffering, unable to get help because their situations sound too ridiculous to be real criminal activity? This question led Holmes to advertise his willingness to investigate problems that sound too strange to be real, a category of cases he pursued with particular interest throughout his remaining career. The umbrella case had opened his eyes to how criminals could exploit the absurdity threshold, creating attacks that fell below the seriousness threshold for conventional investigation, precisely because they seemed too bizarre to be deliberate. The sabotage device itself was studied extensively by Scotland Yard's technical division and became the basis for detecting similar electromagnetic interference weapons. The specific signature, the exotic metal alloy spring, could be detected with proper equipment, allowing authorities to scan for similar devices that might have been deployed against other targets. Malcolm Graves's confession during interrogation revealed that several other devices had indeed been deployed against various targets before Whitmore, with varying degrees of success. Some had achieved their sabotage goals and expired naturally after 3 months without being detected. Others had been discovered and removed by victims who assumed they were dealing with ordinary mechanical failures rather than deliberate attacks. Whitmore's case was unique in that he pursued the mystery intensively enough to engage Holmes's investigation and expose the broader sabotage program. I'm oddly grateful to Whitmore for being stubborn enough to seek answers, one of the other victims said after learning they too had been sabotaged. I experienced mysterious workshop failures that cost me contracts and reputation, assumed it was bad luck or poor equipment maintenance. I never imagined deliberate sabotage through electromagnetic interference devices. If Whitmore hadn't pursued his absurd umbrella problem to the point of exposing the truth, I would never have known I was attacked, rather than simply unlucky. This revelation that multiple inventors had been targeted, and that most never realized they were victims of sabotage, rather than natural mechanical failure, highlighted how effective the attack method had been. Graves and his criminal backers had developed a nearly perfect sabotage system unconventional enough to avoid detection, temporary enough to avoid triggering intensive investigation, yet effective enough to achieve business damage goals. Only Whitmore's unique circumstances led to exposure, Holmes reflected. He was stubborn and resourceful enough to treat an absurd problem as a serious mystery. He had the financial resources to seek expert help. And he came to me specifically, someone with experience in impossible problems and access to sophisticated analytical equipment. If any of those factors had been different, the sabotage program might have continued indefinitely, destroying businesses and careers while remaining completely undetected. The case remained relevant decades later as industrial espionage evolved and became increasingly sophisticated. The principle Graves had exploited, that absurd attack methods provide effective camouflage, was recognized as a continuing threat requiring vigilance. Security professionals were trained to take seriously reports of bizarre mechanical or technical failures that might mask deliberate sabotage. The umbrella that never closed taught us that strangeness doesn't equal impossibility, Holmes wrote in his final reflections on the case. When something seems too absurd to be deliberate, an umbrella that won't close, a clock that runs backward, a lock that unlocks itself, the natural assumption is mechanical accident or coincidence. But that assumption is precisely what makes such phenomena effective as attack vectors. Crime doesn't have to make intuitive sense. Criminals can exploit absurdity deliberately, knowing that bizarre effects will be dismissed rather than investigated. The detective's task is to take seriously what others dismiss as ridiculous, to investigate the impossible until it's explained, and to remember that deliberate malice can express itself through unconventional means. Mr. Whitmore kept a photograph of the infamous umbrella in his workshop for the remainder of his career, not as a memento of trauma, but as a reminder that problems should be investigated rather than dismissed, that apparent absurdities might mask real threats, and that persistence in seeking truth could expose hidden malice that conventional wisdom would dismiss as impossible. The umbrella that never closed eventually did close, returned to normal function after Holmes's intervention. But the case it represented, of unconventional industrial sabotage, of absurdity as camouflage, of apparently ridiculous problems masking sophisticated criminal schemes, remained open in the sense that the principles it revealed continued threatening businesses and individuals through evolving methods. Holmes's solution of the mystery prevented one man's complete ruin, exposed a broader sabotage program, and led to enhanced security practices that protected countless others from similar attacks. It was victory of rationality over absurdity, of investigation over dismissal, of taking seriously what conventional wisdom deemed too strange to be real. And the simple black silk umbrella that had been the weapon's delivery system remained in Holmes's collection, a physical reminder that sometimes the most ordinary objects could be transformed into instruments of extraordinary sabotage, that strangeness could signal deliberate malice rather than random malfunction, and that no problem was too absurd to deserve serious investigation when someone's livelihood and sanity hang in the balance.